Good evening, everybody. My name is Annie Blair, and I'm the project manager with Boston Parks and Recreation for the improvements to Titus Sparrow Park. So I want to thank you all for giving us your time this evening. It's really great to have you participate, and we appreciate your giving up some of your evening. And I also want to thank the Friends of Titus Sparrow Park because of their support and participation and organization over the years. I believe that Steve Sloan, who's the president of the Friends, is going to be joining us. And I know that the organization would very much appreciate having some new members as well as their well-established members. It's a great way to get to know your community and participate in the park. So Steve, if you wouldn't mind, during the chat at some point, if you could provide the address for the website for the Friends, so that if anybody wants to reach out and find out about joining, they can do that. That would be terrific. So what we're going to do tonight is the purpose is really for listening to the community about what you all see as the opportunities and challenges and what your priorities are. And I'll talk a little bit later in the presentation about the sequence of meetings, but we have not come up with any solutions. We just want to hear from you what it is that you all want. So let's move to the next, please. So we have our first community meeting tonight. We have 3 in total. We'd like the second one sometime in June. Early June actually might turn out to be too early, but we want to get that done before people start to scatter for the summertime. And at that second meeting, we'll be showing design alternatives for comparison and analysis. And then we'll reconvene in September for the third meeting that will show a preferred design. And that may be a combination of features and elements from the alternatives that were presented at the second meeting. And then autumn to winter of this year, we'll be putting together the construction bid documents and put it out to bid. We typically like to bid in the wintertime because prices are better then, as contractors look out their window at their equipment standing idle. And then construction next spring and summer. So next. And what we'll do is we'll take you through the presentation. And then if you're joining via the web, you can use your hand or raise your hand during the question and answer, or use the Q&A feature to enter your questions throughout the presentation, so you don't have the burden of trying to remember what your thoughts were until the end. And then if you're joining by phone, you either do *9 to raise your hand or *6 to mute or unmute. Next. So the agenda for tonight are the introductions, which I'll take you through, and then existing conditions and the project overview from our design consultants, Halverson. And we're really fortunate that they're the design consultants for this project because they did the design for the renovation in 2003. And we're fortunate to have Rob Adams with us, who was the project lead at that time. He lived in the South End for a long time and has been involved with the park for a number of years. And then we'll end with community feedback, community discussion, listening, and feedback. So I've introduced myself as the project manager. We have Christine Brandeo, who's the outreach coordinator for Boston Parks, who is hosting the meeting. And then the design team from Halverson's is Bob Eulig, who's advising, Rob Adams, as I mentioned, Jonathan Cave, Joe Persicino, and Nathaniel, whose last name escapes me. But they're from Ty and Bond, and Ty and Bond and Halverson's are now joined under the same company roof. So that's a great range of skills and experience to bring to the project. Next, please. So we'll talk about, throughout the project, we'll talk about the City of Boston priorities, safety guidelines, and regulatory guidelines, such as the Americans with Disabilities Act, park and recreation goals, and community input, and try to find a happy ground that incorporates all of that. Next, please. So the city's priorities are accessibility and inclusivity for people of all ages and abilities, expanding walking access to parks, equity, health, and community building. And I think until the pandemic, we had defined health in a more narrow way, but I think that one good thing to come out of COVID is that we're thinking about health in broader terms. Next, please. So within the Parks Department, we're concerned about the parks being accessible and available to the community, diverse, balanced, and an efficient mix of uses, meaningful and inclusive community engagement. So again, thank you so much for being here tonight. Adaptive and resilient landscapes so that whatever we put in, we can maintain, and to promote connections among the community. Next, please.
Great, thanks, Annie. Just to reiterate what Annie said, my name's Rob Adams, principal at Halverson Ty and Bond. I was a long time South End resident and have recently moved to greener northern pastures up here in Portland, but my heart is still on the South End and with Titus Sparrow on a lot of levels. So it's good to be back, and I'm sorry we're not in public, but I know many of you, and so I'm looking forward to this process and this project. A couple of things on tonight. I'll say three things. I'll probably add one more, but let's say three. Like the first, this is really about a listening session. We don't have any preconceived ideas per se yet, and we haven't shared any of those. Tonight's really about hearing from you, the community. Open spaces, public realm that has a grassroots kind of neighborhood ownership involvement are much more successful. And I think Titus has been a real testimony to that over its course, Titus Sparrow Park over the course of its time. Secondly, I'll be brief. Again, we're gonna try to get through a little bit of background and then really open it up to community. So the kind of chat and raise hand function will be crucial at the end of this. And then lastly, I think, although we don't have any preconceived ideas, I think we can honestly say that there's a lot of really good about Titus Sparrow. We're not looking at changing Titus from the park that it is. It's really a community-based park that serves a lot of functions, a lot of programs really well. We're just trying to make it better, to repair some of the damage that's happened since 2003. It's hard to believe. It's been 18 years. But also maybe to pivot a little bit to some of the recent, to some of the contextual changes and programmatic changes that people have asked for and are desiring as the park moves forward into the next 18 years before the next renovation. So with that, we'll get into a little bit of background and then again, look forward to hearing from you. And I'm sorry that this isn't in person, right? We would be sitting around with a roll of trace paper and some markers and spray paint and tacks and pinning our ideas and hopes and dreams up. So we'll do that virtually tonight. Hopefully in the near future, we can have the meetings in person. So Titus Sparrow, just for those to orient everybody, Columbus Ave down here on the plan south. I'll use kind of the plan pages. It's not quite perfectly south, but plan south, southwest corridors. It's plan northern boundary, and then West Newton and West Rutland Square are the kind of left and right boundaries. And I think there's some really good edges. The fact that Southwest Corridor and Titus Sparrow are kind of blurred together, I think, is a real positive. So project site is essentially the back of the church, back of sidewalk, property line with DCR, and then the tennis courts over on the left side, and then the public realm of West Rutland Square. Just some real quick existing photographs and some commentary, right? The playground has 2 age groups with the sandbox in the middle. There's been a fair amount of wear and tear on the playground over the course of the years. And I know the sandbox is always a little bit of a love it or hate it amenity. And so I'm sure we'll talk about that tonight. And the surfacing, the edge conditions to the church, some of the uses desired or not desired that are occurring around the playground, we can talk about as well. And then some of the accessibility issues existing. There's the long sloping path, from the Prudential, so to speak, down through the park. There's a overly steep accessible ramp, that's a generous term, down to the basketball court. Series of stairs, just keeping in mind accessibility and the need for equal opportunities. Stormwater drainage, clearly the lawn gets a lot of use, gets a lot of compaction. I was on the board of the Friends group, and that was always kind of one of the mission critical goals, was to get better stand of lawn there. And unfortunately, there's a cyclical nature of lawn areas getting wet, people using lawn areas, soil getting compacted, and poor drainage, water standing, right, higher compaction. And so this project hopefully will give us a chance to break that cycle and to get some better stand of lawn in. Some of the site furnishings are pretty dated, so hopefully we have an opportunity to improve those, but a good amount of the programs there, I think, just improving the facilities. And then the usage program, so to speak, of the site. I think there's been a lot of talk, at least when I was there, about the value and the use of the community gardens. There seems to be, a sunnier one and a shadier one. And then the actions and uses of the big central lawn, as well as some of the kind of secondary lawns, the triangle green behind the brick wall. And then there's this another kind of the pine tree knoll on the other side. And then uses of the basketball court and the tennis court. All these functions, I think will remain. Again, just finding the best and highest use for a lot of the spaces. So again, just to orient everybody, hopefully all familiar, the big kind of diagonal swooping path that connects us from Columbus up to the Prudential, the 2 active courts in the upper left, a series of community gardens along West Rutland and then along West Newton, the play space down to the plan left, and then the big open green. And I'll say what, from a designer's point of view, and it plays out in real life, is the park does a really good job of kind of dividing itself kind of elegantly into the 2 zones of active play, the big lawn being the kind of lungs of the space, and then the circulation dividing it into the 4 quadrants. There's a real kind of simplicity and a real elegance, I think, to the way Titus is laid out. And so I'll say, not saying no preconceived ideas, but I think everyone really enjoys and appreciates the current layout of Titus. Landscape, we talked a little bit about the 2 secondary lawns and the main central lawn. A lot of conversations about edges and making sure there's porosity. And so hopefully having a lot of conversation about that as well tonight. Accessibility touched on briefly, right? Really the basketball court and the tennis courts currently have limited accessibility, and making sure we incorporate better accessibility to those. And then there's a series of kind of outstanding features within the park. The masonry walls were introduced in 2003, the granite masonry walls. There's the existing brick wall that runs along West Newton. At one point we had talked about giving some more visual porosity to that. And that's, I think, a point of conversation, hopefully, that we can have as well tonight. And then site furnishings, we touched on it briefly, right? There's drinking fountains and a signage kiosk and pole mounted fixtures and athletic lighting around the tennis courts and a series of different types of seating elements, wooden benches, as well as the kind of precast concrete benches that were added later on after 2003. So, as I said, again, no real preconceived ideas. Tonight is to listen to you about hopes and dreams and fears. But I think, some of if we run it through the flux capacitor of Parks and Recs program and mission, right? This idea of providing seating and elements that are multi-generational from young to old, making sure we accommodate all age groups, right? Democratic. Looking at the play surfacing and other surfacings that are tired and need improvements, looking at additional fitness equipment, improving site accessibility, obviously the drainage improvements, and repairing some of the masonry. These are all kind of low-hanging fruit, so to speak, around simple improvements, and then finding a way to weave in hopefully a little bit of poetry and storytelling with that. So that was a little bit of a fire hose of information. I think as we move forward tonight, if you want to kind of in your mind think about, what's the favorite part of the park for you? What's the perfect day been for you in the park? What's something that you don't think we know about the park? What activities would you like to see in the park? What activities would you not like to see in the park? What events occur there that we haven't talked about or may not be well known? Just general improvements are on your wish list. And then how do you use the park on a daily basis? And so Titus is a very personal space for, I'll say, a lot of us. I'll include myself still in the us. And so I think we're really interested to hear from everybody your experiences, again, your hopes and dreams and fears for how you'd like to see Titus change and evolve with this set of improvements. So with that, we'll open it up. I think, Annie, if you want to add anything, or we can just open it up to comments.
I think let's go ahead and hear the comments.
If whoever would like to speak, if you just raise your hand, I'll unmute you. Or you can put in the Q&A and then someone will answer them. Megan, you can unmute yourself.
Oh, great. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is Megan Aiken. I live in the South End. I primarily use the park with my young son, who is 2, and all of our friends in the neighborhood, similarly use the park for the play space. We also participate in music classes and soccer classes that are also held in the park. I guess my thought or sort of question is around the play area, and if you guys have given any consideration to adding a fence around that area, just given the proximity to the street on both sides, sort of. And I also, selfishly have a young child who runs away from me all the time. So just sort of wondering if that is something you're thinking about as part of the design process.
We can certainly look at that. I think there are pros and cons of fencing play areas. Safety is always first for us, but also a fence doesn't mean anything if the gate's left open.
Sure. Yeah.
And also, it's very hard to find a self-closing gate that works well and consistently. And then there's the visual impact as well, that it can sort of cut the park up into various zones. And I think part of what's so special about this park is, as Rob was saying, the organization of the various zones, but also that it nevertheless reads as a place where the whole is bigger than the sum of parts.
Yeah. And I'll add also, Megan, you prefaced by saying, are we thinking about it, or will we? I'm like, if you raise the point, we will think about it. Tonight is not about, again, this notion of preconceived. Whatever comments
Mhm.
you have, we're happy to consider and take into account. So yes, we will.
Yeah, and I mean, I
look into
definitely hear, your point around aesthetics and functionality. There are a number of parks in the city that do utilize fences, and, thinking about the park holistically is obviously very important. It's just, it's a balance, I think, for a lot of people who have young children of, it's just, especially on West Newton Street, it's extremely busy with traffic and cars drive really fast. So just something I think would be a huge consideration for me is sort of figuring out a way. Maybe it's not a fence around all four sides of a park, right? Maybe it's just sort of addressing higher trafficked areas.
Right, there's a hierarchy to it, or we make sure that there's clear, clear visual sight lines, or there's, the ability to get into West Newton is not as easy as it is to get onto the West Rutland sidewalk. So yes, agreed that
Right.
that's definitely something to consider.
Cool, thanks.
Marlene, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Marlene Inhouse, and Rob, hi, long-time collaborator on parks and other stuff. Great to see you.
Good seeing you.
I had hoped to wait until everyone else's questions were asked, but this is Titus Sparrow Park. I would love to see a statue of Titus Sparrow, or certainly a more expansive description of who this very unusual man was. He was decades ahead of his time in terms of caring for the community that he lived in. He drove around in an old station wagon filled with tennis rackets in the back and tennis balls, but also trash bags. He picked up trash everywhere, and he would tell people, take care of your neighborhood. He was the first Black umpire in the, at the US Open. I mean, this is truly a remarkable person. And all we have is a little plaque that, if you really are standing there still looking for something to notice, you can see it. It is not noticeable. And I would love to see that included somehow in the park. And the other thing is that brick wall at one point was part of a home for unwed mothers. I don't know if you know anything about the history of unwed mothers in the United States, but in the 1950s, before contraception, and when our mores kind of changed to, be much more open in terms of our sexual relationships, women or young girls got pregnant, and the boys went off on their path for the most part. And these girls were often sent to these unwed homes for unwed mothers. And once you're a parent and you think about what it would be like to give up your child, and not only that, but also the, being cast out of the community that you grew up with, including often your parents. There are excellent books written as memoirs by some of these women. So that brick wall also has a history.
Mm-hmm.
I think because the South End is a historic district, it would be really nice to see those pardon me, those two aspects of the history of Titus Sparrow Park strengthened, so that people understand what took place on that location and who made the park happen. Of course, it's never one person, it's always a large group of people. And there's another history involving the raising of the community's infrastructure to make way for a highway that was, of course, defeated, fortunately. And that should maybe that should also be part of it. I would like to have an emphasis in that park on the history of that park.
Yeah, I think Marlene, that's a really good point. I remember Anne talking about the brick wall, you and Anne and Kathy and others, right? And the importance of that brick wall. And to be honest, for very low dollars in the world, this narrative, the storytelling, that extra layer of information, I think can be really powerful and meaningful and not carry a big dollar amount. So I think that's when I said the poetry that we're hoping to weave into the park. I think there's definitely some of that storytelling that we didn't do in 2003 that there's a real potential to do now.
And the statue of Titus Sparrow Park.
Well, that might be a little bit more expensive, right? But,
Oh, okay, good.
yeah.
I don't want you to forget that.
No, I didn't forget it. I mean, Frida got the park, down there by Flower and all mosaic walls and all that. So
Right.
I agree. Like there's definitely more that could be done for the commemoration of Titus Sparrow.
Yeah, he lived on Durham Street, and there's somebody who has part of a biography or an autobiography of Titus Sparrow. So it would take some delving into that. But anyway, thanks for taking note of my request.
Anytime. I hope you're well, Marlene.
I am.
I'm gonna jump to the Q&A real quick for a couple of the questions. Charles asked, can we submit comments and suggestions online?
Christine, is there a place to do that on the project page?
No, there's not. They would have to email you.
Yeah, and if anybody who emails me with comments, I'm glad to share with the Halverson Tie and Bond team. And we actually got a very thoughtful email from Nancy Price, and I shared that with the team right away. So that was very helpful.
Jean asked, I cringe when I see parents sitting on the ground to picnic where I know people bring their dogs.
Yeah, I totally understand that. And I know that when my daughter was a toddler, everything went in her mouth. So I think that there are things that we can do. I know that dogs are supposed to be on leash there. I know that there's a certain amount of signage. And this is a problem throughout the city. But we'll definitely look at ways to make that better. And maybe what that is providing more opportunities for a variety of site furniture so people are less inclined to sit on the ground.
Yeah, and I would ask the front, I'm not in the South End as of a year and a half ago, but when I was there, it was pretty good. Like it comes in waves, right? There's usually a few offenders, their dogs unleashed on the lawn, and then either people call 911 or there's a more kind of, I don't know, people are getting dogs aren't on the lawn and people are moving down to Carlton Court. And so I'm curious, is it a high point right now of dogs on the lawn, or is it just a constant kind of always dogs on the lawn? And we'll have to, make sure that those dog facilities that are available are being used. And as Annie said, make sure that there's signage and enforcement to keep dogs on leash in Titus.
Thank you. And then Stephen asked, I understand there's a way to reinforce grass for heavy use with a plastic structure under the soil. Is this or another method a possibility to include in the renovation? The grassy area is very well used at the park.
Yes, I'm hopeful that we can do better. We recently redid the lawn at the Hatch Shell. Recently, it's probably 4 years now. And I'll say we've all learned a lot in the last 2 decades about soil engineering, drainage, et cetera. And so half of it is going to be the design of hopefully the new lawn section we put in, making sure there's proper drainage, making sure it's the right soil. The other part is maintenance or monitoring, making sure that there's a program, and maybe that's part that the Friends can bring, of a yearly maintenance program to help aerate, reinvigorate, etc. And so I don't know that the plastic rings are the right solution. They tend to be a heat bank, thermal mass. And so while they do provide some structure, they also do provide some detriment to the lawn, and that it builds a lot of thermal mass and ultimately kills the lawn, I think, in the long run. So I'm hopeful that we can find a solution from an engineering point of view, and then coupling that with maybe some operations and maintenance that the Friends could bring, we can find a way to make the lawn have a longer duration.
Thank you. John, I'm going to allow you to unmute yourself now so you can ask your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, hi everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you for organizing this meeting. John Stewart, 20 plus year abutter of Titus Sparrow Park. So I remember very well the meetings we had many years ago, and really it was a great community effort. And I heard Marlene and Rob, and so it's nice to hear old voices again. So and maybe some new people I haven't heard before. So so that was a great effort. My feedback would be, I think the current configuration of the park and what Rob was talking about up front works really well. I think it's a nicely balanced park, and whatever we do to improve the different sections of the park, I hope we maintain that balance and not try to make the park do more than it should be doing today. So that would be just one initial feedback. The other issue, which we never really addressed back then, was around what I call security issues and nuisance. So in terms of security issues, I do support the concept of fencing the park and being able to lock the park at night. If not the whole park, certain areas of the park, maybe the tennis court or the basketball court, because the drug activity in the park, especially at nighttime, has only gotten worse over the years, and maybe it ebbs and flows. I know we currently have a drug problem in the United States, in Boston, but it definitely creates a sense of lack of security in the park. So I highly recommend if we could look at ways to secure the park. And I know we do other parks in the city. I know it takes work to do that security, but not only in sort of, you know, what the other speaker said about, you know, people running out in the street, children, which is also quite important. But if there's a way we can secure the park, it could be locked after the closing hours. I think that's something that we talked about many years ago, but we weren't able to get to it. So I'd like to put that on the list. The other thing, since then, also one thing we talked about is the ability to secure the park by cameras, security cameras. Because a lot of the issues that we face in the park, you know, it tends to be living there, abutting the park. It's repeat offenders, right? So to the dog comment earlier, my experience over the past 20 plus years is you have the people who don't know and the people who don't care. The people who don't know, you talk to them and they're generally great. It's like, I didn't know, which they didn't read the sign, but whatever, they didn't know. And there's a group of people who don't care. And there's been several, I have to say the city of Boston has been great. You know, I have reported directly to animal control, same people every time. Animal control has come out, they address the situation with the repeat offenders. So I'd like to kind of look at the concept of some level of security cameras. I know we do that in different parts of the city. I think that's also important. And my final point would be around sort of nuisance issues, and especially for our butters. So one other issue we didn't fully address a few years ago was the lighting situation. Mm-hmm. So the lighting at night from the tennis court, it's closer to me, I'd know less about the basketball court, shines into the apartments. Yeah. I'm on Greenwich Park, so I'm not right beside the building on 75 West Rutland Square, but it's quite a nuisance to you know, have to spend your night with light shining into the apartment. So others might have that issue, but that's another area that I'd like folks to take a look at. Overall, thanks for the process. It's an incredible asset to the city of Boston. Let's not ruin that. Not that you would, but let's sort of try to maintain that balance. And thank you very much.
Yeah, I think that within the department, the way we've been describing Titus Sparrow is that it has great bones. And we only want to make it better. We don't want change just for the sake of change. Some of the problems that you mentioned, John, are things that are relatively easy fixes. You know, the light pollution is something that we can provide an engineering solution for that can get, it can really mitigate that problem. I will look into security cameras. I've only been with this city for a little less than a year and a half. So there's some interdepartmental factors that I'm not aware of yet, but I can absolutely look into that and share that information with Halverson, Ty, and Bond. The other thing I should mention is that my father-in-law grew up in the South End, and about 5 years ago, we bought his house on Warren Ave in between Dartmouth and Clarendon. So, you know, my daughter practiced soccer here, and it's a place that I love to come to. So you have a fellow spirit on this end.
Yeah.
Great to hear.
Yeah. And John, thanks for the comments. And you know, I appreciate the comment about not adding more. You know, there's been, in my experience with Titus, is those lawn triangles to the left and the right. They're, you know, currently, one might say, under-programmed, but I would argue that they're perfectly programmed, right? It's a quiet spot. It's an unprogrammed space within a park that has some pretty heavy programming. And so having some quiet moments in the park programmatically, not literally, I think is an important part of Titus. And so I don't foresee us trying to, you know, jam in as much programming as possible. So I can appreciate that comment. And Andy's right, like as our knowledge of soils and lawn has increased dramatically in the last 10 years. I'll say lighting controls have exponentially increased in the last 10 years. And so the solutions we had in 2003, I think we can do exponentially better to cut off the light pollution associated with the tennis courts and the basketball courts. So that's, as Annie said, an easy fix. And I will say, if you have a question in the chat and we answer it and you don't feel like we adequately answered it, please don't hesitate to re-ask it or raise your hand to get more description. Or if we missed the point, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Great. Carrie, you can ask your question now.
Hi, this is Carrie Nelson. I'm on West Newton Street. Thanks for having this forum. We love Titus Sparrow, so we're very excited to see what the community can come up with for improvements. I want to echo a couple of things that some of the previous neighbors mentioned. And the first is security. So we have a small child and feel that the security is a really important component of our decisions on which park to go to, of the choices that we have around us between sort of the Blue Park and Hayes Park and Titus Sparrow. We often choose the smaller parks, particularly because there is better fencing. And that's both sort of fencing things in and fencing things out. And I would say that in the last few years, we've been really troubled by leftover syringes and things that we've found in the park. So I would strongly encourage the idea of fencing at least the playground, if not the whole park, if possible, because I think it's such an important aspect of the quality of life in the city, and the aspect of, you know, syringes and drug use in the park. It's a direct detriment to the people who use the park. That's the first thing. The second thing, just sort of aesthetically, I wanted to ask or just make some comments about is on the community gardens portion of the park. I feel like we could do more there. I think there's not much symmetry. I know there's a lot of effort, but it doesn't come out in my view, in a sort of congruent way, and it certainly doesn't continue throughout the seasons. So in the winter, it feels a little bit like a wasteland. I think it'd be nice to see a more thoughtful approach to those gardens. And then behind the playground area itself, where there's these stone structures, one thing I've noticed over the years is a lot of families use that space to have small birthday parties for their kids. It's been a great space for families during COVID to be able to, gather outside in a safe way. And I feel like that space too could really be improved to use it as some sort of a gathering space that's not exactly visually what it is right now, which seems to be more like some grass, some dirt, some stone. It's not a really welcoming space, but it could be a really well utilized space. So those are my comments. Thanks again for the forum. I think this is terrific.
And Carrie, the last comment, the space you're talking about, is it the one behind adjacent to the brick wall or adjacent to the church?
The brick wall. Thank you.
Can someone fill me in on the history of those sort of zigzag concrete benches?
I can. Others from the Friends can speak up. So after 2003, that lawn triangle didn't have those benches. It was, a lawn that, just as Carrie said, people had birthday parties, and you could, I think a lot of mommy and me classes occurred there. And then members of the community, when I was on the board, felt like there needed to be more going on there. And so the compromise, if you will, was those stone benches. And so me and others in the Friends group kind of designed and laid them out. And then the Friends, or maybe Parks, I forget whether the Friends or Parks bought and installed them. So that's the history with them, to provide some seating opportunity for people that were having events in that little triangle.
Okay, great, thanks.
Stephen, you can unmute yourself now.
Hi, excuse me, Steve Sloan. Sorry, I'm having dinner now too. A few comments. One, Rob, if we manage to put that grass in, I know you're asking for the Friends group to help with maintenance. I'll ask for instructions on the best way to do that, because
Yes.
we don't really have an expert on that. On the triangle on the left that was just spoken about, that shady triangle, it's used for lots of events we've put on often in normal times in the kids' concerts, usually once a week for about 6 weeks in the summers. In addition, people often have birthday parties, and it's used kind of as a secondary field when that first field isn't used. So kids will play soccer there and things. I kind of think it's a nice area to keep. But what I was going to say was that other triangle on the right side towards West Newton Park, it's hillier, it's shadier, it's just not used that much. If one was to put things like exercise equipment that I saw was sort of on the website as a possibility, I think that'd be a great place for that. Because that area, you're never going to manage to have grass there too much because it's so shady, which may be appreciated by people doing exercises anyway. And it's just really, I think that right side towards West Newton is underutilized. That'd be my comment.
Yeah, yes, to your first comment, we 10, 15 years ago, there was a lawn care consultant whose name now escapes me, that the Friends hired to do a seasonal application process and aerating. And then the other part we did in conjunction with the Parks Department was, during really wet events, the lawn would be fenced off so that it didn't get overly compacted. And so there was a lot of back and forth. And then, I don't know, time went by and my kids, got older, and I think the soil just got overly compacted, and it became this this renovation should have occurred 5 or 10 years ago, for at least for the lawn, but never did. So yeah, we'll definitely have some sort of operation and maintenance manual associated with the project.
Thanks. So we're going to jump back to the Q&A. Megan, as well as David, would like to know, can we expand and add more adult fitness equipment?
Yeah, we can absolutely look at that. And we're finding that that's a trend in the area. And there are more options for adult fitness equipment than there were certainly the last time the renovation was done here. And I think the goals are to look at things, look at pieces of equipment that are really useful, that don't tend to have moving parts that would fail, and would fit in aesthetically. So it's great that there are more options now.
Thank you. Joan asks, states, we are residents in St. B neighborhood and we love the design. The way the path winds diagonally through the space and slopes and separates into various lawns is dynamic and enjoyable. The updating of the playground equipment is definitely needed, but keeping it to 2 different age group levels would be preferable. In favor of keeping a sandbox, and definitely would appreciate a bigger tribute to Titus Sparrow as well. Such a great story.
So I have a couple of comments to that. One is that it's great that you appreciate how the park is zoned out. It's industry standard for play equipment to be designed for the 2 to 5-year-old age group, and then the 5 to 12-year-old age group. And part of that is about how the equipment is used, but also it's based on anthropomorphic dimensions, so that the height of the guardrails and the height of the platforms corresponds to the age group for which the equipment is designed. And it's found that that has worked fairly well. And that's just the way the industry is anyway, so that's a given. I do know that the city has moved away from sandboxes, and that's because we just can't maintain them safely and cleanly. And we'll be looking for other ways for kids to manipulate materials. I know that one thing that's been done in some other parts is using what are called pick plants, where there are non-toxic fruits or foliage that can be manipulated by the kids, and it doesn't hurt the plant to have them pulled off, as long as they aren't pulled off in huge numbers. But there are other ways that we can accommodate that kind of play without introducing fecal matter and making it a hiding place for needles. Rob, do you want to add to that?
No, I mean, I think, the sandbox is probably surprised this is the first time it's come up. It's probably the biggest bone of contention in the play space from my memory. So I'm curious to hear more comments on it. But as Annie said, most open spaces, public realm is moving away from sandboxes.
Thank you. Keith wanted to add to a comment from earlier. The brick wall is an important part of South End history and can be highlighted more. There was a weeping cherry in the circle at the end of West Rutland Square dedicated to Titus Sparrow. It died after being covered in salt one winter. The abutters to the park cleaned up the circle, but the cherry requires extensive work to be replaced. It would be nice if it could be.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a valuable kind of objective.
And maybe it doesn't have to be a cherry, but something that's also decorative, but more salt tolerant.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bob, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, Bob Barney. Thank you so much for holding this. I wanted to start out by saying thank you for this past Sunday. I held a memorial there for a friend who had passed. We had about 50 people. And we used the zigzag concrete seats. So a lot of folks were sitting down there. So it was really quite nice. The thing I wanted to probably endorse was what Marlene brought up about the history. I think that's really important, and I just don't think people get it. So anything that could enhance the history of the park and the person would be wonderful. And I'd also like to suggest, is there a way that we could add some art to the park? One thing that we did on the Southwest Corridor Park over the last year and a half is we painted the waste barrels with flowers. So it's a simple thing, but maybe there's something like that that we could add to the park. That would just be a suggestion. And the last thing is a water feature. I know this is a push, but water is so soothing. Is there a way that that could be introduced into the park? Thanks.
Thanks, Bob. We'll consider all of those, definitely. I mean, and they're all, the water is probably the most problematic, but I think it's worth exploring. We should look into that, but not only from the sound, but also this idea of manipulation by children. So, and then the art, I think we agree 100% on the art. If there's opportunities, we'll definitely look for those.
And there's also there's the Richard Lee Jones basketball court. And I know there's some signage there, but even from an art perspective along sort of the concrete base, maybe there could be something there to commemorate that person.
A good idea.
Of the basketball court.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's so many opportunities for interpretation here. And that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be representative art, but there's such an incredible story in this place that it's going to be really fun to think about how to tell that story.
Great. Katrina, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you for this forum tonight. And I know we only have a little bit of time. I have a few questions. One, about the lock. I grew up in Sparrow Park. I grew up before when they had a swimming pool there. I'm from Braddock Park, lived there over 30 years. And what was very intentional and great for my family and for people that actually grew up, I'm talking about South Enders that lived there, that passed away there, that are still living there. I just wanted to know about the friends of Sparrow, who I've read about, who I've met some of them before. I wanted to know a little bit about your intentional approach on trying to get the diversity back within the park. When I grew up, it was mixed. South End was diverse, and I just still see like it just feels as when I drive by or going to Star Market or something, it saddens me that it has not been a component, and maybe I don't know, to reach out to surrounding areas such as Meth Union Manor and to TDC and to other places in the neighborhood where people of color live. Because for me, a park is for families. A park is somewhere where you enjoy yourself after work, after school. And I think that park should probably, especially with your new, with the new look, should be an intentional, diverse look. And how do we bring that back? How do we bring at least to invite those families that have kids? Because when they see people that don't look like them, they might feel like that park isn't for them any longer. So I don't know how we could talk more about this. Do we bring it to the Friends meeting? And I also wanted to, if someone's writing it down, the name of the park, will that still always stay? Because when you start looking at new other things, will you change the name, or has that been any talk or any language?
I have not heard a single word about that.
Great.
I think it would be, my own personal feeling is that it would be extremely disrespectful.
Okay, thank you so much. It's great to hear that. And two more things, and I will just give the floor to someone else. The sandbox. I work in health and recovery. I work in infectious diseases. And the sandbox is really something that you should really, really, really consider of, I don't know, tarp or something, because the needles, they're just outrageous. I mean, it's just not in the South End or Mass Ave area. The needles are everywhere. So all it takes is one stick, one prick, and I'm not trying to scare anyone, but maybe that should continue to be a conversation. And my last thing is, when we talk about security, we talk about locks and putting up fences. And I know that there have been many events that even TDC's held, and everyone is included, everyone's invited. But when you talk about putting locks, who will be like in charge of a lock of a park that belongs to the community? Will someone have to go to like the Friends of Sparrow to get access to unlock the park? Or does the city of Boston, I'm just like throwing it out there, who will, you know, have that opportunity to say, okay, yes, we're going to open it. No, we're not going to open it. So that's all I have to say. And thanks for this forum. And hopefully this park, when we see it, it's going to look great.
So let me just respond to the issue of locking parks, because this just came up at a park that we're beginning to look at in Bay Village. And in that location, every time they sort of clean up the common and garden, a lot of homeless people and people with addiction issues move into this park. The policy of the Parks Department is not to lock a park, but to keep it open for everybody. But there are things that we can do with physical design to make it less attractive to a problematic segment of the community. So I think that we can be smarter about where the planting is, where the sight lines are, what's visible. And I think that there are several ways that we can remedy this, at least in large part, if not completely, without having to close off the park. I know that in some places it's a neighbor who locks the park and then unlocks it early in the morning. The Parks Department cannot do that, and the police department cannot do that. So I think that we need to look at some other solutions.
Yeah, and
Thank you, Annie. So,
I'll just briefly also expand on that, Katrina. Like, I don't know. I mean, the focus of most of our design, all of our design in Boston, all the public realm that our firm does is all about equality, equal access, equal programming. Like the redesign of the park will not have an exclusionary component in its aesthetic or structure or program. We recognize the diversity of the South End, and all of our open spaces are complete public realm. And I would agree with Annie around security. I don't know that a tall fence and building a wall is the right solution. I think we can find a better solution of visual porosity, adequate lighting, right? Making sure the broken window syndrome doesn't exist and the park is well maintained. I think all those are better solutions than building a wall and locking the park up at night. But we'll explore all options and have that dialogue with the community as we move forward.
thank you. Megan, you can go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to expand upon the comment about the adult fitness equipment. I had put a comment in the chat, and I wasn't necessarily saying that I wanted it. I guess I just was trying to understand, or if at this point you guys in the project planning have enough information to share about it, just since we're talking about, how heavily programmed the park already is and how much there's already going on there. Sort of the rationale for sort of adding an additional element, where, does something like that go? Or, we're just sort of talking about the space in general. So just wanted a little bit more information about that fitness equipment.
I'll say we're going to figure it out together. We'll come back at the next meeting with some possible solutions. And I think the nice thing about exercise equipment is that it's fairly innocuous, right? I don't think it'll be as big as if we do it, if the community and Parks Department decides that's a worthwhile objective. It won't be as big as what's across from BU Beach, you know, down on the Esplanade that takes up a fair amount of space. It'll be much more quiet and out of the way. And so I think it's just adding another opportunity for people to use a park that may not have a current, you know, being currently served, right? The young are being heavily served at Titus, but is there an opportunity for older adults to get the same exercise?
Thank you. Stephen, you can go ahead.
Thanks. Just a couple of more things. Going back to where there might be space for adult equipment or even maybe some more playground equipment. I do think that space on the right side of the picture adjacent to West Newton Street in that hilly area is underutilized and could accommodate some of that. There's also actually a little bit more space to the very bottom right of the picture next to the playground where there's like a wall and then the church is maintaining it, but I don't think it's really church space. That's what I've heard. I'm not sure down there, but it's been an unfortunate area because it's sort of a no man's land and so used for all sorts of things that people don't really want to be used either in a church grass area or the park. The other thing, I just wanted to respond to Katrina from the Friends group. We do try to put in programs that would appeal to everybody. We have these concerts that are incredibly diverse of all different genres of music. But I'd certainly appreciate, Katrina, you know, you can contact me through the website, or I've got my email address in the Q&A. You can, we'd love to have you either join the board or at least give us advice and take your opinions as we do programs in the park to ensure that they are as inclusive as possible for everybody in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm going to jump to, if you guys want to respond, and then I'm going to jump to the Q&A.
No, thank you, Stephen, for adding that.
So Mary has a few comments. She says, I oppose fencing, which is a turn off to people who like to stroll through the park. Camera concept, a good idea. Dogs in the park and creating separate area has been a sore subject for years. This is a people and children park. She also states that drug use in the park is not just a park issue, it's a citywide and statewide and countrywide issue. And lastly, she stated she loves the idea of a tribute to Titus Sparrow. So sorry, but not in favor of sandbox because of needles and the dog poop ending up where our precious children play. So sad. And then Charles has a few comments also. He has 3 points he has. What he likes is the current layout, walking through the park when I'm traveling through the area. Metal benches with backs. What he doesn't like is stone benches without backs. And then what he would like to see is adult fitness equipment, more seating, perhaps tables and chairs for working or eating. And then I can jump back to allow Marlene to talk again.
Yeah, I want to just interject real quick.
Yeah, sure.
I think we agree the diversity of seating, whether you like benches with backs or don't like stone benches. I think how Titus could benefit is maybe a slight increase of diversity of seating. So as you mentioned, you know, tables, maybe there's community kind of long communal picnic tables. You know, I think these are all points of discussion that will come back with options at the next meeting, but appreciate the kind of mention and request for diversity of seating.
Yeah, I think there's a greater variety of site furniture than there was, say, 10 years ago. And I think we want to give people opportunities to use the parks in different ways. So for instance, one thing I've done in other parks is individual seats with an occasional table in between them. or I put a glider in a park at one point that turned out to be really popular with older folks because they could get a little bit of movement out of it without a terrific amount of effort. So there's a lot more than we can do now than we used to do.
Thank you. Marlene, you can go ahead.
Yes, hi. I just wanted to get back to Catherine Cooley's comment about locking the park. And I think all the important things have been said. There's just one example you may not know about, which is that Library Park next to the South End Library had that very same issue 2 decades ago. And in fact, they did put a fence around it and it was locked and it was a disaster. So precisely for the reasons that you mentioned, which is like, who's going to lock it, who's being locked out and so forth and so on. It is in a neighborhood like the South End, which is so diverse and there are so many issues. I mean, it is just a very unfriendly thing to do, or it can quickly degenerate into a very unwelcoming situation. In Library Park, it was a little different because the Library Park is actually owned by the BPL, but nevertheless, the social cultural message is very much the same. And so that's all I wanted to say about it.
Yeah, thanks, Marlene.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything they want to add? I don't think we have any other comments or questions this time, guys.
Well, then I'll thank everyone again for their valuable time and thoughtful insights. And please feel free to reach out to me either by phone or email. And I'll be glad to talk to you and pass on your ideas.
Yeah, I'll second that. We're available through Annie and Happy. And as I said, this is a process together. So we're the hired professionals and we have lots of experience around this. So we'll bring a series of ideas back to the community, but ultimately it'll be a process together about what the community wants and what everyone feels like will work and not work and what, how to fulfill everybody's hopes and dreams. So stay tuned for early June and we'll be working diligently between now and then. But I honestly really appreciate everybody's comments tonight.
And thanks to Christine for hosting.
No
problem.
Do you want to mention the project's website, Annie or Christine?
So if you use this QR code, it will take you to the project page on the web. And that has my contact information on it. Christine, is there anything that we should add to that description?
No, also just let everyone know that this meeting was recorded, so it'll be posted on the project website within a week. So if anyone who couldn't make it tonight, you can share that with them also.
Great.
Great, thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Have a good one, everyone.
Christine, how many people do you think we had about?
About 30.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
It was a great amount of people.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks.
No problem. Have a good one.
You too.